The sky over Monte Carlo dawned heavy that Sunday, June 3rd, 1984. Dense clouds covered the principality like a somber veil, and the sound of fine rain echoed through the hills, descending to the harbor where yachts glistened beneath the water running off their masts. The Monaco Grand Prix has always been synonymous with glamour, precision, and courage. But on that day, it would be the stage for something much bigger. It would be the birth of a myth that would transcend the sport history and time. As the teams raced against the clock in the pits, adjusting tires and checking technical details, a young 24-year-old Brazilian slowly walked toward the white car of the small Tolleman team. The name etched on his racing suit was simple, but it carried a destiny: Ayrton Senna da Silva. It was only Senna's sixth race in Formula One. He was coming off a promising start, with small glimpses of the talent that had accompanied him since his karting days. But until then, he was just another rookie. Tolleman lacked resources. The engine was limited, the aerodynamics precarious, and the reliability almost non-existent. That car rarely finished races. But Senna, with his steady gaze and the serenity that seemed to contradict his youth, knew that this rainy Sunday would be different. He felt it. Since he was a boy, he used to say there were days when body and soul aligned with something greater, a kind of divine harmony that allowed him to see what others did not. And on that gray dawn, he knew something was about to happen. While the more experienced drivers looked with apprehension at the drenched asphalt, Senna seemed at peace. Alain Prost, Niki Lauda, Nigel Mansell, and Keke Rosberg discussed strategies. The debate in the pits was unanimous: the race would be chaotic. Many argued that it perhaps shouldn't even take place. The rain had turned the narrow streets of Monte Carlo into a river of blind corners and treacherous puddles. But for Ayrton, this was not an obstacle. It was an opportunity. He always believed that rain leveled the playing field and highlighted the drivers. On a wet track, it wasn't engine power that won. It was sensitivity, control, and faith. The Brazilian adjusted his yellow helmet, took a deep breath, and entered the cockpit of the number 19 Tolleman. The sound of the heart engine began to roar, vibrating like an untamed animal. He felt every pulse, every tremor of the chassis, as if the car had a soul of its own. It was an almost spiritual relationship, a silent dialogue between man and machine. The rain intensified. Television cameras showed drops hitting the asphalt, forming small streams of water that spread on the curves. The crowd, protected under colorful umbrellas, waited anxiously. When the red lights went out, the world changed. The start was chaos. Prost sped ahead in his McLaren, followed by Mansell and Lauda. Behind them, cars skidded, collided, and kicked up curtains of spray that made it impossible to see. Senna, starting in 13th, remained calm. While others fought with the wheel, he simply let the car flow. It was as if the asphalt spoke to him, as if each curve had its own voice that he could hear. In a few laps, he began to overtake. 1, 2, 3 cars. Each maneuver was precise, almost surgical. He didn't force it. He just waited for the exact moment, the perfect braking, the invisible line that only he could see. In the pits, the engineers began to notice something strange. The lap times of car number 19 were astonishing. The Tolleman, the weakest car on the grid, was among the fastest on the track. The commentators, still skeptical, began to speak his name with hesitation: Ayrton Senna. Who was this boy? How could he drive so fast with such a limited car? In a few laps, he was already in the top 10. Soon after, in the top 5, and then, before a disbelieving crowd, he overtook Niki Lauda, the Austrian champion, and took third position. The rain increased. Visibility was almost zero. Cameras showed cars sliding, spinning, hitting the barriers, but in the midst of the chaos, there was a stable silhouette, an almost supernatural calm. Senna's Tolleman seemed to ignore the laws of physics. While Prost struggled to keep his car on the track, Senna closed in lap after lap. The chronometers didn't lie. He was taking 2 seconds per lap from the leader. The crowd in the stands no longer saw just a race. They were witnessing something epic. On lap 29, Senna overtook Lauda definitively and became second. The gap to Prost was less than 5 seconds. With every corner, the Brazilian seemed closer. The red McLaren slid dangerously, while the white Tolleman floated over the water. It was a dance between courage and balance, between risk and perfection. The McLaren engineers began to sweat. Prost, inside the car, looked in the rearview mirror and saw that yellow dot approaching like a ghost. Fear began to rise. Ayrton maintained absolute focus. His body still, his gaze fixed, his rhythm constant. Every curve was a prayer, every lap a surrender. He used to say that in the rain, he entered another state of consciousness. He felt as if time slowed down, as if everything around him disappeared. It was just him and the car, united by something greater. But destiny had other plans. When Senna was about to catch Prost, the race director, Jackie Ickx, decided to end the race. The red flag was shown and the race was stopped. Officially, the valid result would be that of the lap before the interruption. Prost was declared the winner. Senna, who crossed the line seconds later, even raised his arms, believing he had won. When he learned of the decision, he slowly lowered his helmet and remained silent. In the pits, the Toleman team erupted with emotion. Even without the trophy, everyone knew they had been part of something historic. The whole world had just discovered Ayrton Senna. European and American newspapers reported the young Brazilian's achievement. Headlines read, "The Miracle of Monaco, Formula One's new star, the boy who won without winning." McLaren itself, his rival that day, began to study him closely. Lotus would hire him shortly after, and the rest is history. But to understand what happened that day, one must understand what made Senna different. While many drivers excelled in technique, Senna excelled in sensitivity. He drove not only with his body, but with his spirit. Alain Prost was the opposite. He was methodical, rational, cold. A natural strategist. Every curve for him was a calculation. Every braking, a mathematical decision. Senna, no. Senna felt. He used to say he drove with his heart, that the car was an extension of his own being. In the rain, this became evident. While Prost feared the unpredictable, Senna became a part of it. The difference between the two went beyond technique. It was philosophical. Prost believed in control. Senna believed in surrender. The Frenchman said the secret to winning was not taking risks. The Brazilian believed that risk was the path to truth. He spoke of driving like one speaks of faith. He said that when he was at the limit, he felt the presence of God. And in Monaco, on that gray afternoon, the whole world had the impression that God really was at the wheel with him. As the years passed, that day gained even more significance. Monaco 1984 was not a simple race interrupted by rain. It was the beginning of an era. It was the first appearance of the man who would change Formula One. It was the day the impossible was challenged by a boy from São Paulo with a mediocre car and an unwavering faith. Behind the scenes, many criticized the decision to end the race. Even today, fans and journalists question whether Jackie Ickx would have done the same if Prost had not been the leader. Some say it was protection, others call it politics. But what no one doubts is that if the race had continued, Senna would have won. The pace he maintained was unattainable. The rain, which for everyone was a curse, for him was an inspiration. After Monaco, the name Senna began to carry a different weight. He would become synonymous with perfection, courage, and spirituality. His relationship with the steering wheel was compared to that of a maestro with his orchestra. There was no room for chance. Everything was intuition, precision, and faith. The engineers who worked with him later told impressive stories. They said Senna felt minimal changes in the car just by the sound of the engine, that he could perceive differences in tire pressure just by the feel through the corners, that he could drive faster in extreme conditions because he saw the asphalt as if it were part of him. This sensitivity, combined with an almost religious discipline, made him an incomparable phenomenon. Monaco was the first sign of something the world was yet to understand. It wasn't just talent, it was purpose. Senna did not race for fame or money. He raced for transcendence. He wanted to touch the limit between the human and the divine, between control and destiny. And that is what made Ayrton Senna the greatest driver in history. The 1984 race officially ended with Alain Prost on top. But in the collective memory, the winner was someone else. Because there are victories that do not need a checkered flag. There are victories that happen within people. And on that rainy day, Brazil Formula One, and the whole world gained something they would never lose. The certainty that perfection exists, even if only for a few moments. Years later, when Senna's name became synonymous with legend, he still remembered Monaco with affection. He said it was there that he understood the power of faith, that it was there that he realized he could connect with something beyond technique. That day, he would say, I understood that when you believe completely, nothing is impossible. And that is why, even today, every time the clouds close over a circuit and the rain begins to fall, the eyes of the world turn to the sky, Because it was in the rain that the myth was born. Because it was in the rain that a young man named Ayrton Senna revealed to the world that driving can be a form of prayer. Monaco 1984 was not just the start of a career. It was the baptism of a genius. That boy with the serene look and restless soul showed that courage is continuing to believe when everyone doubts. That faith is accelerating even when the world tells you to brake, and that the true limit is not in the car, nor on the track. It is within each of us. Ayrton Senna won without winning. And that is why, 40 years later, his name still echoes like a prayer in every wet corner, in every drop that touches the asphalt, in every heart that believes the impossible can be real. Ayrton Senna da Silva. The man who transformed rain into poetry, fear into faith, and racing into eternity. There are circuits that test cars, others test men, but there is only one that reveals souls. Monaco, the small principality nestled between the sea and the mountains, is one of those places that transcend the sport. The narrow streets, the tunnels, the corners that seem to be drawn by divine hands, and the golden sheen of the Mediterranean form a temple where every lap is an act of faith. For Ayrton Senna, Monaco was not just a track. It was a living presence, a spiritual challenge, a mirror where he saw his own destiny reflected. There, he didn't just drive. He found himself. Since that first Sunday in 1984, when the rain crowned him without a trophy, Monaco came to occupy a sacred place in Senna's life. The principality had revealed him to the world, and with every return he felt as if he were coming home. No circuit matched his essence so much. The precision, the risk, the beauty, the proximity of the walls, the smell of fuel mixed with expensive perfume, the contrast between luxury and danger. It was as if everything there existed to test the limits between the human and the divine, and Senna lived for that. With each passing year, his relationship with those streets became more intimate, more symbolic, more spiritual. Monaco was his altar, his confessional, and his battlefield. He won there 6 times, an achievement that still places him above any other driver in history. But those victories were not just numbers. Each one seemed to tell a different story about who he was and who he was becoming. In 1987, for the first time, the world saw Senna dominate the principality from start to finish with the Yellow Lotus. Under the bright sun, the car looked golden, and Ayrton drove as if he had been born among those curves. It was the first time he crossed the finish line in Monte Carlo with his arms raised. The applause echoed through the balconies and yachts, and the cathedral bells seemed to ring louder. He said that winning there had a different flavor, as if the world itself bowed for a few moments before perfection. 2 years later, already at McLaren, Senna would reach the technical and emotional peak of his career. The car was dominant, but his talent even more so. In 1988, he experienced what he called an out-of-body experience. During qualifying, he drove a lap so fast and precise that he couldn't even explain it himself. He said he felt as if he were in another dimension, driving from a place that was not physical. That Saturday, while the world watched the chronometer in disbelief, Senna was over 1.5 seconds faster than Prost, his teammate and rival. When he returned to the pits, he was pale, his eyes fixed on the void. He later said that he had felt an indescribable energy, something that transcended rational control. "I went beyond my limit," he said. "I was in a kind of tunnel. It was as if I was no longer consciously driving the car." For him, that lap was not just a demonstration of skill, it was contact with the divine. On Sunday, he led the race with absolute authority, leaving Prost far behind. But a small mistake, a minimal distraction, caused him to crash into the guardrail at the Portier corner. It was the first and perhaps only time Monaco showed him that even the gods of the asphalt can be punished. Senna got out of the car and, without speaking to anyone, walked to his apartment, which was a few meters from the track. He stayed there alone, looking out the window, trying to understand what had happened. It wasn't just frustration. It was introspection. He felt that the track had taught him a lesson in humility. That moment, which could have been trivial, became symbolic. From then on, Ayrton was never the same. Monaco had broken him and rebuilt him. In the following years, he returned stronger. He won again in 1989, and then again in 1990, and once more in 1991. It was as if each victory in Monte Carlo was a chapter in a story of love and mutual respect. He knew every unevenness in the asphalt, every variation in grip between the street blocks, every shadow that changed the visual reference of the corners. Engineers said Senna drove in Monaco with supernatural precision, as if the layout were engraved in his mind. For him, the track was not a sequence of curves, it was a continuous conversation. He spoke to it, and it answered. While other drivers complained about the lack of space, the close walls, the impossibility of overtaking, Senna saw beauty in all of it. He said that Monaco was the supreme test of concentration. Here, you cannot think about anything else. If your mind wanders for a second, you're out. This phrase would become a metaphor for his life. In Monaco, as in existence, he believed that perfection lay in being completely present. The track demanded total surrender, and he was the man of total surrender. When the engine roared and the tunnel approached, Ayrton was not just a driver. He was a meditator in motion. In 1992, Monaco prepared another challenge for him. That year, Nigel Mansell's Williams was far superior. The British car was an almost perfect machine, equipped with active suspension and technology that left the others helpless. But Senna never surrendered to the logic of machines. He believed in the power of will, and in Monte Carlo, will counted as much as power. Mansell led the entire race until a tire problem forced him to pit. When he returned, Senna had taken the lead. The final laps were a work of defensive art. Mansell, with a much faster car, tried every way to overtake. But Senna, with millimeter precision, closed every door, braked at the limit, accelerated with exact measure. The difference between the two was minimal, and every corner seemed like the end. When he crossed the finish line, Ayrton was exhausted. He had won with his heart, his mind, and his soul. Once again, Monaco had tested him, and he had passed. The following year, in 1993, came his sixth victory, his last in Monte Carlo. It was lightly raining, and the crowd, who already saw him as a king, watched another display of control and serenity. Senna drove as if the track were an extension of his body. There was no resistance between him and the car, nor between the car and the asphalt. It was a rare harmony, and when the checkered flag fell, everyone knew they were in the presence of the greatest of them all. No other driver had tamed Monaco with such mastery, in so many different circumstances, with such distinct cars. Over time, the relationship between Senna and Monaco became almost mythical. Journalists said he seemed to fuse with the circuit. Local residents, accustomed to the noise of racing, said there was something different in the sound of the engine when he passed. Mechanics noticed that the car came back from practice less battered, as if it had been guided by gentle hands. It was as if the track respected him as much as he respected it. In interviews, Senna spoke of Monte Carlo with reverence. He said it was a place where the driver met himself, where there was no room for distraction, where error was a reminder of humanity. And that is exactly what fascinated him, the possibility of touching the limit of the human. For him, Monaco represented more than victories. It represented the encounter between man and his vocation. Every lap was a meditation, every curve an act of faith. He compared the concentration required to race there to a spiritual state. In Monaco, you have to be beyond thought. If you think, you make a mistake. If you feel fear, you make a mistake. Only those who are completely surrendered win. These words summarize what set him apart. Senna did not seek absolute control, but absolute alignment between body, mind, machine, and purpose. There are images etched in collective memory that show Senna walking slowly along the empty Monaco track on Friday mornings. He walked alone, looking at the ground, observing every detail. Journalists found it strange, but it was part of his ritual. He studied the imperfections of the asphalt, the reflections of the sun on the guardrails, the points where the shadow of the trees changed visibility. But there was something beyond technique. It was a kind of respect, almost religious. He knew that every millimeter could be fatal, and he treated the circuit with the solemnity of one who treads on sacred ground. This mystical relationship between man and place is rare in sports. There are soccer fields that consecrate players, there are rings that mold champions, but the connection between Senna and Monaco surpassed all of that. It was as if the track recognized him, as if destiny had written that there, Ayrton would find the best of himself. Perhaps that is why every victory in Monte Carlo was also a moment of communion with something greater. When Senna spoke about his races, he frequently mentioned the power of faith. He said that at certain moments he felt he was not alone in the cockpit, that something guided him, protected him, inspired him. In Monaco, this feeling was constant. It was such an extreme, challenging environment that only complete surrender made him win, and that surrender for him was a form of prayer. With every perfect lap, every millimeter touch on the curbs, Ayrton approached something that seemed to be his own essence. Even after his death, the name Senna and the name Monaco remain intertwined. Anyone who visits the circuit still feels this presence. Fans leave flowers at the spots where he shone, and every new champion who wins there carries the symbolic weight of racing in the house of the greatest. Records can be broken, but the aura remains. Because what Senna did was not just win, he gave soul to the asphalt. In an interview in the 90s, he was asked what it felt like to race in Monaco. Senna was silent for a few seconds, looked down and calmly replied, "I feel like I'm in the right place." This phrase, simple and profound, summarizes everything. Monaco was the place where his mind found clarity and his body found precision. It was the point of balance between risk and perfection. Perhaps that is why the story of Ayrton Senna and Monaco seems more like a love story than a competition. A demanding, intense love, full of trials and redemptions. The track revealed him, punished him, taught him, glorified him, and he, in return, gave it the highest level of driving the world has ever seen. Today, watching the old images, it is still possible to feel something different when the yellow, white, or red car cuts through the curves of Monte Carlo. It is as if time stops for an instant, as if the driver's soul is still there, dialoguing with the track that consecrated him. Those streets, which have heard so many engines, seem to hold the echo of a different sound, the sound of a man who found in Monaco the mirror of his own eternity. Ayrton Senna and Monaco. Two inseparable names. Two forces that recognized and completed each other. A circuit that tested everyone, but only one managed to transform into a part of himself. And when we talk about perfection, courage, and transcendence, one only needs to remember the curves of Monte Carlo and the yellow helmet that traversed them with the lightness of one who drove between heaven and earth. Time has passed. Machines have evolved, engines have changed their sound, rules have transformed. But there is something that never fades. There is an eternal instant when the rain touches the asphalt of Monte Carlo, and the world seems to hear again the echo of an engine that no longer exists. It is the sound of Ayrton Senna racing between the sky and the sea. It is the symbol of the search for perfection, of total surrender, of the faith that is not shaken by the impossible. Senna did not race for fame. He did not race for money. He raced for purpose. He raced to connect with something that none of us can explain, but all of us can feel. And that is why, even decades later, when the yellow helmet appears in memories and the name Monaco is spoken, a chill runs through the body. Because he wasn't just fast, he was true. And the truth, when it touches people's hearts, never grows old. Today, Monaco still carries the scent of the history he wrote. Every guardrail, every curve, every tunnel holds the respectful silence of one who knows that someone different raced there. Someone who transformed racing into art and the asphalt into eternity. Ayrton Senna is still alive, in every drop of rain that falls on a track, in every driver who closes their eyes before the start, in every fan who believes that courage and faith are capable of moving the world. And if you have come this far, it is because somehow you also believe in this. You believe that perfection is a journey, not a destination, that winning is not crossing the line before others, but touching the limit of what you are capable of. So, may this story remind you of something simple, yet powerful. The impossible only exists until someone proves otherwise. And Senna proved it. If this story moved you, share it. Show the world that there is still room for true heroes. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and continue following the stories that keep alive the flame of those who were born to inspire. Because legends don't die, they just change the track and continue racing within us.